but I'm here to talk about art, so let's start. So I call this the Big Bad Artist Talk because everything needs a title. I don't want it to be big, I don't want it to be bad, but again, everything needs a title. So maybe the good little artist talk, or the decent, medium-sized artist talk. Something like that. So here's a bit of my background, even though you all probably know me to some degree. So I grew up in Lake Country. I was just talking with a friend the other day about this, and growing up in Lake Country is a little bit different from somewhere with a little more bigger of a population. The number one form of entertainment is mostly like extremely petty vandalism. So
And drinking.
And drinking, exactly. So whatever you can kind of get away with is your form of entertainment, and for a lot of kids this is like going to some crown land and ripping it up with ATVs. For me it was more so using things like saran wrap cardboard and discount paint to like create random street art and block people's doorways and things like that. So I found lots of entertainment there. So I stumbled into creativity really naturally, just as kind of, there's nothing to really do, so let's make some things to do. And went to UBC Okanagan, graduated in 2014-15. I studied fine arts and took a big interest in philosophy in the beginning. Later on, once I started getting into higher level courses, I found it a little bit obtuse and less kind of applicable, so I stopped showing interest, mainly held on to the ethics portion of it, and continued studying fine art. I really started out as working in collage, so printmaking seemed like the only place that I could really get away with that, because painting, sculpture, things like that didn't really seem to fit the bill. But then I started getting more and more sculptural and installational with my work as time went on. Some residencies that I consider really formative in my art career was a co-op at Studio 111, where I made zines with a bunch of artists, and put together an artist book once a month and had a big launch party for it. And then later the Tony Only Artist Project, which I was actually with Karen for that. She took part in it as well. We studied with Mimi Pond and Wayne White, two LA artists that are pretty influential to my work. And currently based out of Kelowna. So the work so far, I want to kind of talk about the evolution of my work over the past couple years. Like why am I making this now, and how did I get here? So I like I said, I started out with collage, and once I started finding all these interesting objects in places like wells, and like I said, I find random things at construction sites in Woodfield and stuff like that. I started trying to like wrap them in my collages, kind of creating these weird packaging and stuff like that. So this one on the far left is one of my favorite kind of studies or experiments. It's called A Bottle for Women, and it's based on, it's an homage to Jeff Wall's A Picture for Women, and which is based on Manet's Woman in the Bar. If we're familiar with that one, it's about kind of subverting the male gaze, and this Tarzan image I thought was just perfect for that. His really dominant pose kind of being pushed back by by Jane's face. Strange. So anyways, I always like to keep it really surreal and bizarre and kind of funny to talk about what I'm talking about. Even though this was just mostly playing with the materials. And then as time went on, I started to subvert the meaning of all of these historical objects that I was finding, kind of redirect them in a certain way. I mean, I have a different relationship with like a hammer from the 1940s than say someone who was actually born in the 1940s. So I'm making meaning from these old things which I have a different relationship with than someone who was actually present for their history. So I get to kind of speak to it with a position of youth. And like this one on the top left is a detail from a piece called Pipe Lineage, and it was about kind of 3 generations of oil workers in my on my dad's side, and kind of where I fit into that picture. And I don't consider it like a really communicative success as a piece, but it was just me trying to communicate something with all of these old objects, and some of them of familial value, and some of them that were just found objects. And this piece on the right is called "Watching the Sunrise Over a Mountain I Built with My Bare Hands." And this was me trying to, again, create meaning from found objects that I have no relationship with, and create kind of a house or a place for this imaginary figure, this almost ideal, which is, it's about masculine identity, it's about Canadian identity, but it's about some human presence, and trying to work through what that all means in regards to history, and in regards to the present, and in regards to myself. Where do I fit? Where do I fit as a Canadian? Where do I fit in as a man? And then this far on the bottom left is a piece called "Far Country Hero." And I was trying to, make it, I'm always trying to make it funny, I'm always trying to make it lighthearted. Like that's not a place that any person would live. It's kind of like a shack that's very obviously constructed in an impractical way, which is something that I work as a designer in my day job, so I kind of like fumble around with these ideas, like what's useful, what's useless, what's art, what's design, and where's the boundary, where's the line. I didn't mean that to rhyme, but and then this was an exhibition I did in the Fina Gallery at the university called OK Caribou. And I kept running into these ironies within the Okanagan and within different regions of BC. And the ironies were between what tourism and marketing of that region looks like and what the actual problems in that region are. So in the Okanagan, a good example would be agritourism and all the kind of activities that we kind of have circling the orchard industry and agricultural activity. And then juxtapose that with the mistreatment of migrant workers and how big a problem that is here, and has been for 100 years or so, right? Starting with Japanese migrants and First Nations people. And just it all seemed very bizarre to me. So I created this exhibition looking at the Okanagan, and especially the Selkirks and Caribou region. And that's where I found this big problem going on with the mountain caribou. There's a huge decline in their population right now, and they're a very small subspecies of caribou. And at this point, early 2014, there was no wolf call. There was just kind of rumblings of a big problem going on in BC's backcountry. And I explored it with things like toys, with things like construction yard scraps. But again, I wanted to, you can see up in the top right, I've created this kind of like imaginary village where I again tried to, I guess, imply a human presence, which was an ideal and not necessarily a person. It's human development, it's commercialization, it's industry, it's identity. And a lot of people seem to grab onto this idea in the show, like I was criticizing hunting and hunters specifically. And I didn't really want people to take that away from it at all. I was more so trying to create a metaphor of human impact through the image of a hunter, of a huntsman, of someone who's outdoorsy. And so I think that's what I was trying to do more so with this show, was to really speak to that character, that ideal there. And then kind of my capstone project for my education at UBCO was this show called Goods for Men, Real Good Strong Man Men. And I created a a space dedicated to men's marketing and a satirical and playful look at it over the past 100 years. It's almost a retrospective, where I could sell all these fake objects, put price tags on them, so pretend to market the idea of great strong beer drink. It's not just a beer; it's strong, it's great, it's the ideal of what it means to be a man, and just kind of play with the bizarre nature of selling masculinity and selling the masculine values, male values. And I've always tried to carry that with me, the playing with the absurd and the weird, and just kind of by exaggerating it a bit, I find that it really calls attention to just how bizarre situations can be in society and human experience. So, moving on to the current show, The Big Bad. There's this quote here that I think really speaks well to the exhibition. An intellectual says a simple thing in a hard way. An artist says a hard thing in a simple way. And with this exhibition, I'm taking a really complex problem and situation and turning it into something very simple, a very simple scene. It's a very hard thing, as Charles Bukowski would say, a very big problem. So that's what I'm essentially trying to do. So I started out with creating brands for all of the human factors that were a part of it, that were a part of the problem. Is everyone familiar with the wolf call that's going on? Anyone? No? So in the Selkirk and Caribou region of BC, there's that earlier problem that I was talking about, a huge decline in the mountain caribou population, and they're very, very endangered. And a large amount of their population decrease is kind of attributed to wolf predation. So the Canadian government chalks 40% of their decrease to wolf predation. But there are so many factors that are contributing to why wolves are able to hunt the caribou better. So things like outdoor recreation, that gives snowmobilers, skiers, outdoorsy types access to really high mountainous areas that they normally wouldn't when they can do things like heli skiing. And this creates kind of super highways for wolves to kind of access caribou terrain, because when wolves are walking on like really heavy snow, they have a hard time getting around. But when it's packed down by a snowmobile, by a logging truck, by any kind of new infrastructure, it gives them access to terrain that they normally wouldn't have. So there's kind of this big underlying problem, and the wolf call is that the BC government is kind of putting on, where they're killing upwards of, they've killed about 200 wolves so far, and they're kind of continuing the program for another 5 years, is what's estimated. So it's kind of like a Band-Aid attempt. So it's really going to take a lot of fixing here, like as far as keeping industry out of BC's backcountry, keeping people away from developing, and kind of putting limiting measures on a lot of outdoor recreation. So these are all kind of satirical. Does anyone recognize this logo?
Tolka?
Yeah. And does anyone recognize that logo?
It's a British Columbia logo.
Mm-hmm. So and anyone recognize this one? This is loosely based on the Remax logo.
Oh.
So these are all kind of playing with those brands, and I've got hand painted those hand painted logos kind of tucked in different parts of the exhibition. Oh, Yeah, so I was planning to have a video up here. I don't think it's working. That's okay. But I want to ask, like, I want to make this a little more conversational, if that's all right. Maybe open up the floor and ask what you guys think about the wolf cull that's going on in BC. And maybe even if you've heard about it, and where you've heard about it and why. Does anyone want to speak to that?
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is something you found in your research, but I had heard that kind of part of the issue wasn't even really so much the wolves, but also like the habitat for those caribou is shrinking due to development. Is that also?
That's a big factor too. Yeah. So yeah, as people as new developments and new kind of commercial endeavors kind of push their way into the Selkirks, the less habitat the caribou have to kind of work with. They normally live up in really high elevations, but during when things are melting, they kind of come down to they kind of come down in elevation and feed off of lichen and stuff like that. So when either of those areas, you know, alpine or just normal area, I guess, are kind of threatened, then it just like scares them off, right? They don't want to go anywhere where there's been human activity in the last, like, you know, month or so. So they kind of keep away from clear cuts and stuff. Yeah.
Are the caribou, were they a herd that was transplanted there, or are they native to the area?
They're native to the area. There are quite a few herds. They've gone down in numbers just so drastically that it's almost like you can't even call some of them herds anymore. Like if there's a herd of one caribou, like what do you call that? Is that a herd anymore? So there are some smaller ones and some bigger ones, but this problem actually happened in Alberta probably 8 years ago, and there were some woodland caribou herds that were really under threat. One of them was a little smoky herd, and I can't remember the name of the other one, but the government kind of went through this insane wolf culling process where they killed about 900 wolves over the period of, it's actually even more at this point. I think it was maybe about 1,100. They killed about 1,000 wolves over 10 years, and they got to a point where they stabilized the population of caribou, which is great. You want to get it to that point, but because they allowed so much more industrial activity and didn't kind of have a steady hand with oil and gas exploration and things like that in Alberta, the herds just kind of stayed at the same point. So they didn't kind of grow back to the point that they actually wanted to or aimed to. So I think it takes a lot of policy and a lot of kind of government action to really make a wolf cull work, because that's like a band-aid, but you really need kind of a foundation.
Is this the same herd where they have like the nursery where the mom and calf stay? Is this the same where they're doing that where it's all enclosed and they stay till a certain time where the calf is and they'll release them? Is that? I know there's one herd where they're doing that, right? Where they call it the nursery.
Yeah.
It's all fenced.
Depending process.
Yeah, where they collect the lichen and
Yeah.
make sure they have enough stuff in the pen so they can give birth to the calf. But I guess that's one of the really
Yeah.
one of the ones that really sets the rules is they can see.
Yeah.
It's an interesting conversation about humans trying to make it all perfect in this little enclosure kind of thing, right? So it's that whole
Yeah.
trying to get it right.
Have you read much of the Canadian stuff? I think that's farther north.
Yeah. I've heard of some like case studies. I haven't done like a ton of research into like the process and stuff. But I hear it can be like a big problem when they release the caribou actually out into the wilderness, and like they have to go back and find their herd at a certain point, and often they can be kind of like intercepted by wolves trying to do what wolves do. So I hear it can be problematic, but I haven't heard many success cases. If there are like a lot of those, I'd be really happy to hear, but I don't know. Yeah, but it does kind of seem like, you know, you're going to create like some kind of Disneyland for caribou to kind of like feed and grow and
They'd be
and
happy, there's toys there, and, you know, but they're the whole thing is missing out the link of why things happen the way they do, and people, whoever's in charge, and I'm sure they're quite educated biologists who understand this process as
oh,
well.
totally, yeah.
But trying to skip certain steps in the whole process, or just like you said too, when they get released, and there's a whole other issues that come that aren't anticipated or no one thought of at the time, kind of thing. So all that trying and whatnot still didn't work in there either.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't heard any. I guess last time I heard about this was they were still in the nursery. I don't know what they call it nursery. That's my word. But they were still sort of ahead of the base yet.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. But that's up north, did you say?
It's one of the herds that they're doing it too. Is it up north that they're doing it? I can't remember now.
Yeah, I think it's up near Mackenzie, the Kennedy Plateau area, I believe.
Okay.
But again, sounds like what you're saying, it's kind of a band-aid, and you don't just say, perhaps like, you know, biologists are working and doing that kind of thing, but again, it's like the government funding area of band-aiding rather than the regulatory things.
Yeah, exactly. I know, yeah. So I think there's a lot to learn from Alberta's case, you know. So it's just going to take like a lot of work. Like if it's actually going to be worthwhile at all, like this. I first was so interested in this because it was just really ethically interesting that you would kill one animal to save another, and that's kind of like there's some kind of dilemma there for me. But when you have all of this kind of all these foundational problems, then it just was so interesting to process. And I think that's, you know, why I had to make this show. You know how a lot of kids, when they play with toys, they kind of like process the world. Like it's kind of how they deal with things and think through things. So I think I needed to do that as an artist to kind of come to terms with this whole mess and kind of even form an opinion about it. So they didn't even, when I started I was just like, oh, this is really curious. And I feel like I came to a certain place that I'm happy with after doing the show. And I hope a lot of people have gotten a chance to kind of come to terms with what's going on as well through the exhibition, just sitting there and kind of experiencing the big bad problem.
When I saw the exhibit in the summer,
Yeah.
We couldn't see the film because it was so bright outside.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And today, it just made all the difference.
Yeah.
Seeing that all together.
Yeah, I kinda had
way
to-
more sense.
I had to decide at one point whether I was gonna like cover up the window or whether I was going to leave it as it is. And I decided that I wanted the visual from the street. I wanted the visual when you walk by on the sidewalk more than I wanted a crystal clear picture. So yeah,
It's perfect.
that's cool. That's good. Because when I was setting up, it was a bit overcast, so it worked, and I was just thinking, oh, on a bright day, this isn't gonna work so well.
People can watch it from outside.
Yeah, yeah, and I hope that like as things get later toward early November, that it'll be even clearer.
A couple of thoughts to share.
Yeah.
I would say both Pio or Paul was
Mhm.
also popular in the early 80s.
Yeah.
And I don't remember circumstances, but I remember the news shots, of news being shot from the helicopters and stuff.
Yeah.
Natural. And another thing, as far as the contemporary practices of logging companies because of the punching in roads and making access for whoever to cover the distances faster. So they start to, like, once all of the logging is done, and before reforestation starts happening, so they so-called deactivate the roads. Because when you have logging roads, so obviously it's a potential for planting more trees, so it's always driven by potential gain.
Oh, I see.
But in the same time, like all of the like boulders or whatever, like they don't mimic natural environment, but you don't have that straight cut road for easy access for the animals. So it kind of tries to become its own environment. And then I agree it's right.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of interesting. I mean, I that was a big problem. That was a huge problem in Alberta as well. With like after an oil and exploration company would kind of pave the way, like make a huge clear cut through the forest. They'd keep kind of going back just to kind of push any new growth out of the way and keep those roads, even though they weren't active or necessary. They just wanted to keep them operational so that there could be more activity in that area in the future if they wanted to. So it was kind of just like, yeah, a lot of people really just like holding on to those specific spots because it was just an investment, right? They've already invested in that road, so they might as well kind of make use of it. But that wolf call in the 80s in BC was actually successful. That actually it worked out. It was though the process was super inhumane. It was probably like there was tons of like really unethical poisonings and really kind of shoddy marksmanship, let's say, as far as like shooting from helicopters. You can guarantee that not every shot's going to be a kill shot when you're 100 feet off the air, 400 feet off the air, so, off the ground, sorry. Yeah, it was the 80s. Things were different then. Yeah.
What are the comments from like the government of British Columbia on this?
Well, currently there aren't many comments, but there's a big kind of they refer to it as a conservation effort, the wolf call. But also they're putting a lot of limitations on heli skiing and snowcats and snowmobiling in certain more endangered areas, like the areas that are most recognized as having problems. But there's still industrial activity, and they don't. The BC government usually doesn't comment on it. But there's even been like probably in August there was an expansion to a current pipeline in northeast BC that's about 30 kilometers across endangered caribou territory, and that was approved by, but although flagged by the National Energy Board, it was still kind of allowed to go through. So that's currently happening right now.
Does your exhibition propose a solution, or is it just sort of a reflection?
I guess it's a reflection more so, and I think we all kind of know the solution, and I hope that everyone can kind of like speak to how BC could do it better, to how industry could do it better, how everyone could do it better. So I just wanted to kind of reveal how complicated it was in a simple gesture that looks almost that. What I like about making exhibits that look like they're in a museum, look like they're historical, is we can kind of look at the present as though it were the past. And I feel like you get a lot of perspective looking at things that way. So when you walk in there, I hope that people go, wow, this is really complicated. This is really interesting and super bizarre. And then kind of go, oh yeah, this is happening right now. This is all current. But I think when you're more removed from the situation, you can kind of have those those thoughts. Like when you walk into a museum and go, wow, we used to use tools like that. We used to, like, isn't that crazy? So I kind of hope that there's a similar feeling with the exhibition, the installation.
Is it going anywhere else?
Not to my knowledge.
But that means that you're sending it out.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm gonna take it anywhere further. I don't know. We'll see. I don't have anything lined up in the near future, so.
You said the previous wolf hall was less humane. Do you have information on how they're going about this current wolf hall in different ways, or?
It's very quiet. I know that there's it's mostly shooting wolves from helicopters. Actually, what they do is they tag an alpha male at the beginning of a season when they're kind of like more on their own, and then once that alpha finds their pack, then they call all the wolves, either from helicopters or by lacing animal corpses with strychnine poisoning, or with ground traps. So they have like multiple methods that they use, and they kind of use that alpha to kind of find the pack. And what I find the most inhumane is that that alpha like doesn't really know that it's kind of revealing the situation, like revealing, like every time they find their pack, and then everyone in the pack, all the wolves.
It's almost like a family thing. It's emotionally disturbing the way they go about it.
Yeah, and I think that I know this was a big problem in Alberta, but with the ethics of it was they would let that alpha live and then go find another pack and then go find another pack. So it was kind of that alpha was like the
psychological torture.
Yeah, I know. It just seems incredibly inhumane. So I don't believe that BC is doing that. I mean, I don't know whether it's really more ethical to just kill the alpha at that point, but it's really disturbing, the process. But it's
First
better.
Nations involved with this at all, or?
There are a few First Nations groups involved. There's a group in Chetwynd that's actually involved in the hunting process, the hunting of the wolves, but not a ton. So they're just kind of, they mostly keep to their village and keep wolves out of their village, and that's kind of their process. So they just lay ground traps around the area, and really what they want is they want to be able to live off caribou at some point. Like that's what they used to be able to do. So that'd be great to do that in the future. But I've heard interviews with some hunters, and they're semi-hopeful, kind of that it could work out. So they're just doing a little bit here and there. And there are some First Nations groups that are like hugely morally opposed. Against the wolf call. But I'm not sure if those groups are even in the Selkirk. So. We have a lot of celebrities that are really opposed to. Miley Cyrus, Pamela Anderson. They all went on live television to declare that they were opposed to it.
Is this all happening in Canada?
Yeah. It was funny. Christy Clark had kind of a retort to Miley Cyrus's presence in BC. Did you hear about that? She said something super dorky and political, but she was like, I don't believe Miley Cyrus is educated enough on our environmental policy. I believe that if she wants to help us out with our twerking policy, we will talk to her about that. It's just like, come on, really. Anyways. So does anyone have any more questions or thoughts?
It's a good question. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's 21st century science behind all of these ideas. So, it's good.
I don't know if this is like true of the scientific community, but I work at UBC Okanagan, and one of our science course unions brought in a wolf to they did a talk, and their position, that group that came, they were conservationists, and their perspective was that the wolves were just sort of more of a scapegoat in the scenario, and that it really was more industry and these, backcountry explorations and different things going on that were causing the bulk of the problem. The wolves were sort of just taking the brunt of the blame, and so they, were attempting to educate people that, it's not just what the government is saying. So I think as much as the government says, oh, well, science is on our side, and this is what conservationists are telling us we have to do, I think that might be a little bit, might be part of the picture.
Yeah. Yeah, well, like I said, that their environmental review of the situation said that 40% of the problem was due to wolf predation. They didn't say what the other 60% was. They kind of like, they'll make mention that there actually was, it was brought to the Supreme Court that they wanted, I'm not sure who brought this to the Supreme Court, but someone wanted the BC government to accept that they were willfully negligent in the problem. In the case of the mountain caribou, and the BC government did say yes, we were willfully negligent. So they kind of have accepted that that their policies and that their governance has kind of caused the problem. But whether that shows through their actions or not is kind of a different story. So, but it's a good step when there's not that level of denial there. Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming out. So I'll just put this quote up here because it's one of my favorites. And Peter Singer is one of my favorite ethicists, and I think this speaks really well to the situation. Whether we can say animals are so much dumber than us, and that's therefore they're suffering. Therefore they don't count as much. But people have so many different arguments about that, about why it's why we matter more. But I think in suffering, when we think of the suffering of animals and the suffering of human beings, then we're kind of on an equal playing field. Sorry to end on such like a